Thank you guys for joining us today. Hope you had no issues getting onto this meeting. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Todd Grockey, the Finance Director for Citizens to Elect Rick Larsen. Wanted to thank Rick Larsen, Congressman Larsen, and Rick Steves for joining us tonight. And we're ready to start. So hope, sorry about the wait. And I'm gonna give to the floor to Congressman Larsen.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Todd. And I want to thank Rick Steves for being here. Todd, I hope you're checking the chat function. People say they can't see or hear me, but I can see or hear fine. So I just assume everything's okay until I hear something different. So I am a little distracted right now because I'm flipping between another meeting. The U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Transportation is meeting right now, and I'm taking a little break from there. We're going through a major transportation bill and exercising the remote technology use to do the meeting. And so at some point, I'll have to step aside to go back into that. Hopefully, I will have introduced Rick Steves by then, and he can be provide some opening comments. But just a quick update for folks. I think what I'd like to address is a couple of things. One is the last couple of weeks and the murder of George Floyd and what that has meant for the country's ability to not just address police violence and police reform, but larger racial injustice issues in the United States. Congress is moving forward on the Police Justice and Policing Act, and that's a bill that has gone through the House Committee on Judiciary and will be back in session next week on Thursday and Friday in order to work that bill through the floor and pass it and send it to the Senate. It does a variety of things, and it does mainly focus on reforms in how law enforcement and policing takes place here in the United States. Many of the provisions of that bill are based on President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, from a report published in 2015, and from a report from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, a report published in 2018. I also spent time talking to local elected leaders and local community leaders about some of the things that we're doing here locally, but also things that we can incorporate into that piece of legislation. So please watch this space. It's especially important, considering tomorrow is Juneteenth, the day that we celebrate the actual freeing of slaves. This is a date celebrated in the African American community, and it should be celebrated by all of us. The day in 1865, when a General Granger came into Galveston, Texas, and let former slaves know that the war was over and they were free. It took place 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And in many ways, of course, we've come a long way since then. And in some ways, we have a ways to go. And so please continue to stand for diversity, for equity, for inclusion, recognizing that Black lives do matter in the United States. A very tumultuous week at the Supreme Court, which is pretty important as well, because today's decision on DACA is important. It said that the Trump administration failed to show why their argument in front of the court was adequate to get rid of the DACA program, so that the program that supports Dreamers is still in place, and we'll need to move forward to put that into law. It may not happen this year, but hopefully we'll get a chance next year. I also wanted to recognize that in this COVID-19 pandemic period, that it has really shown that we have a ways to go to get the economy to recover, but the public health response has to lead the economic response. So the 5 counties I represent are in various stages of reopening, from Island County to San Juan to Whatcom, Skagit, and Snohomish, where I live. I would note that Snohomish County has the highest unemployment rate from any county in the state, 20.2%. And so that's why this transportation bill that I'm working on in the transportation committee right now is so important, because it's part of a longer-term infrastructure-based recovery that is a longer-term investment in the jobs that we need to have a longer-term recovery, economic recovery here in the United States and here in our state. Meanwhile, I'll continue to work with my colleagues to ensure that those folks who used a payment protection program or a PPP for your small business, that you're able to have the time, have the space to get that loan forgiven so it becomes a grant, that we address the unemployment claims backlog, which is not a federal issue, it is a state issue, but we're doing all we can to support the governor and his team to get that backlog done. So there's just frankly a lot of work to be done. And when next year rolls around, I'll continue my work to protect the environment, to fight climate change, to protect the right to vote, and to ensure that that vote that you cast is in fact the one that is counted. And protecting that right to vote is critically important. Jobs and job training, the skills training for the jobs of the future, and that next generation workforce is extremely important to me as well. Something else as well is important is the ability to travel. But before I introduce Rick Steves, I do want to recognize, I think we have a couple of elected officials, and I'll just recognize them by name, not ask them to speak. But I know Cassie Franklin, who's the mayor of Everett, is on the line tonight, and she's doing a great job there. Rich Wyrick is a prosecuting attorney in Skagit County as well. I think he said he might be on, and appreciate that. Pinky Vargas is a city council member from the city of Bellingham. I believe was also on the call tonight. And if there are other elected officials, please put yourself in the chat room. I want to introduce you, but I want to thank all of you for being willing to put yourself out there, being an elected official, and helping address all these issues. I know it's a very trying time for local governments, a very trying time for people who want to be in the workforce, but because of unemployment, because of the economy, we can't. And I want to let you all know that continues to be foremost on my mind, even as we go into this campaign season. And we can talk a little bit about the campaign later, but I think right now might be a good time for me to introduce a special guest. I believe we have him waiting in the virtual wings, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Todd?
Yes, sir. And then,
all right.
He's here. So.
Great. So I asked Rick Steves to come on. He's obviously, you know him from Europe Through the Back Door. We used his book when we went to Greece. We stayed at a place in Olympia, not Olympia, Washington, but on the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece that he stayed in. We asked for the Rick Steves room, but they'd already turned it into a shrine. But it was really great to have him on here. He talks about how travel is a political act. And, you know, having been able to travel a lot as a member of Congress, I understand that. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about interacting with the world. And he has some really interesting insights now because we're not traveling a lot. And I asked him to speak about that and a few other things. And then we'll go to some questions after he has a chance to speak. So without any further ado, I want to introduce a special guest tonight, and that's Rick Steves. Todd, can you take care of that for me?
Sure. There's Rick Steves. Can you hear us, Rick?
I sure can.
Wonderful.
Hello,
Thank you for being on the webinar today, and you have the floor.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Congressman Larson.
Sure, Steve. Sure, Rick. Thanks a lot for coming on.
I guess when you were just talking there, we were talking about the irony of not being able to travel in a time when we're confronted by a problem that sees no borders. So now we have borders that we can't go through, but I really believe that the problems in our future are problems related to climate change and problems like this virus pandemic. And it's a whole new set of tools we need to deal with these. And I know that we have no problem passing a budget for $700 billion of military hardware, but maybe we're going to come to a time when we realize that's money that's not really the most wise investment for our national security. And ironically, we have a government now that is bragging about, America first, and we can do it alone, and we don't need to be part of the family of nations. But we're confronted with a problem right now that makes it very, very clear that we've got to work as a family of nations, and rather than focusing on walls, we need to build bridges. And rather than sinking money into military hardware, sure, we need our military security, but I think soft power is the real power of the future. And I'm not talking $700 billion of soft power, but I'm talking a little bit of soft power, and we'll find that that will actually make America more appreciated, and it'll make America more effective in helping invest in a stable world, and that'll make us all safer.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about maybe from your business's perspective? I don't want you to, air your sad laundry, but you're also a business owner, as owner of Europe to the Back Door, and what has this pandemic meant as an example of one business?
Well, my business, it's easy for me to feel bad about my reality right now. I was in such a good mood until just now. I've been, I employ 100 people here in Edmonds, and last year was our best year ever. We took 34,000 people to Europe on more than 1,000 tours, and we were just exuberant, and I just had 100 European guides in my living room here, where you've been, Rick, when we've had some of your meetings with people, and we were just excited about the best year ever. And that was just in February. We had 100 Europeans on a party boat out in Puget Sound, just having an amazing time. And 10 days later, the first cases in Kirkland were showing up, and oh, geez, what a difference. And now I've got zero income, zero revenue. We've had to cancel all of our tours. I'm confronted now with the responsibility of being an ethical employer. What do you do with the 100 people who count on you for their livelihood? Livelihood. I'm no linguist, but if you study that word in there, is how are we going to live? How are we going to feed our kids? So we're working very hard. We're sharing the sacrifice by pulling back on our work weeks, but I'm determined to keep my staff together and maintain our team. We're going to do that. The odd thing about this crisis, I've been running my travel business for 30, 40 years, we've had a lot of 9/11s and volcanoes and this and that, but there's no end in sight to this one. We don't know how long this is going to last. So it's a scary thing. But thankfully, thankfully for my employees, I guess, I'm a privately held corporation where we've not dispersed all of our income over the last years to all the shareholders, who are then on something else. But I'm the only shareholder, and I take the good years with the bad. And I've had a lot of good years, and I'm going to have a few bad years. So right now, we're just in a transitional stage. We're going to hunker down. We're going to keep our staff together. We're going to be patient. I'm not going to be the first tour company out of the gate, but this is not a good time to be a tour company, nor is it a good time to be a guidebook writer. I've got 50 guidebooks. They were just doing so well, and they're right up to date. As you're telling the story about the Peloponnese and finding a beautiful little restaurant and so on. I was so excited about that, and now it's just all ground to a halt. And I can feel sorry for myself, but I'm really blessed to be able to live here. I've got a comfortable situation. I feel like I'm almost cheating the virus from a personal point of view. But I've traveled enough to know that there's a lot of people really hurting. There's a lot of people in our midst. I look out my window here in Edmonds, and I know behind every door there's a story, a hard story of families struggling and afraid and wondering how we can get through this. And it just makes it more important, more clear than ever that we need good governance, we need honesty, we need science, we need community. We need to come together.
What do you when you're obviously still in contact with your guides in Europe? Right. What do you hear from them about? Well, kind of on the soft power question, what do you hear from them about not being able? The part about not being able to get people together to share our cultures, to share our ideas, to share our thoughts.
Yeah, our whole mission, Rick, is to inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. Now, there's only one guidebook in the country that outsells my Rick Steves Italy guidebook, and it's the guidebook to Disney World in Orlando. So it's a big market, and for a lot of Americans, travel is escapism, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But for me, travel is getting out of your comfort zone. It's learning about your own country by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. It's gaining an empathy for the other 96% of humanity. 96%. It's recognizing that half of humanity, 4 billion people or whatever, are living on $5 a day. And 10% of humanity, 700 million people, are living on less than $2 a day. That's called extreme poverty. And it is grappling with that. And it is not having a big, heavy guilt trip. I have no guilt trip about being a very privileged American, but I have a responsibility, I think, as a citizen of this planet to complicate people's convenient obliviousness to the real problems in this world. And that's what a travel writer should do. In the Middle Ages, you had the medieval jester. And the king actually gave the medieval jester room and board in order to be annoying. His job was to go outside of the castle, learn what the peasants were complaining about, learn all the dirty jokes, and come home and tell the king what they were thinking. The king needed to know that. We need to know that now as we try to grapple with future challenges. And for me, travel is a beautiful thing. We go out there, we make friends, we realize the world's a beautiful place. And we come home with the most beautiful souvenir, and that's a broader perspective. You asked about my European friends. Europe can compete with America, and we can complain about each other, but we are kindred spirits. We are cousins. Europe right now, when they look at the United States, there's a sadness. They lament the loss of American leadership. We've got different presidents come and go, different military policies come and go, different hard trade policies or whatever that not all of us might embrace come and go. But the ideals of America, those are much more fundamental, much more enduring than any current fiasco. And those are what inspire people. And the ideals of America still shine brightly, but people are missing American leadership. They want American leadership. They need American leadership. And the way that we've abandoned that position in the name of America first is just so ironic to me, because we are galloping to America last. And a big part of our electorate is celebrating that that'll teach them this is America first. You cannot go it alone on this planet. And if you think you can, you're going to learn the hard way how misguided you are. And so these are some of the lessons of travel. And, I'm an odd travel writer because I really embrace that whole idea that when Thomas Jefferson said travel makes a person wiser, if less happy, you just realize there's real issues out there and we're all part of it. And for me, it just gives my life meaning. It sort of carbonates my world, and I'm so thankful for it. And I love my niche of going out there, learning about the world and coming home and sharing it. I'm a big fan of public television because it respects our intelligence and it assumes an attention span, and it brings us programming that broadens our perspective. I get to produce shows like my special on fascism that's very thought-provoking as America tries to learn from the lessons of European fascism in the 1930s. We just produced a program this last month. It's airing all over the country about hunger. It's called Hunger and Hope, Lessons from Ethiopia and Guatemala. Wow. And to me, that's just so exciting for Americans to understand the impact that we could have as a nation. For 1% of the development aid we're coming up with now for COVID relief in our country. All the World Food Program is asking for is 1% of what we're giving our country to make sure the rest of the world doesn't become destabilized by this crisis. And that's a hard sell. That's a very hard sell with our electorate. But if people knew the reality and the stakes, how high they are, and what a good investment it is to empower people who are already dedicating their lives to working in the trenches to help make this world have more economic justice, if they could understand that this is a practical investment. I understand half of American voters don't care a bit about love your neighbor. They may wear a cross on their lapel, but the last thing they think about when they go into the voting booth is love your neighbor. That haunts me. That haunts me when a good, solid, God-fearing American goes into the voting booth, and in the privacy of that voting booth, they vote for what's good for them and their family, completely ignoring the fact that who wins this election impacts poor people in our country and south of our border far more than it impacts us.
Yeah.
That's fundamental. And if we can share that and inspire people to be good citizens that way, our country will be better off and the world will be a better place.
That's I appreciate you saying that. There's a couple of responses I have. That one is you mentioned the jester, the fool who was to go out and then come back. Next time I'm called a fool by a constituent, which will probably be tomorrow, I will remember this. I'll remember that story.
Good.
And wear it with pride. Wear the title with pride.
Nice.
The second is you mentioned the World Food Program, and there are other international organizations that, the World Health Organization's in the news because of the COVID-19, and the president wants to pull out. We pulled out of an Open Skies Treaty recently. This retraction of the U.S. from the world. It's frustrating to me. I'm much more of an internationalist, but it doesn't get around the fact of what you said. And I've actually been criticized by people for saying this, exactly what you said. America's ideals, people still want them. People still want to know we stand for them. They might be even more frustrated than we are with the current administration, and I'm very frustrated with the current administration. But in my travels as part of the job, there are people who still want us in the region. They still want to know that if they call, we'll show up. And they still want us to stand for democracy and stand for human rights.
Yep.
And they're willing to look past the current folks for now. But I think it just underscores, just to be slightly political here, it underscores why we need to fix this coming this fall.
Europeans are interesting. They cut you slack when you elect somebody the first time. If you elect them again, then they really wonder. I mean, you bought his message there, and that was 4 years ago, and now you realize it wasn't really very truthful, and then you vote for him again. That's what confuses Europeans. Because Europeans, they know governments do not always represent the will of the people. Italians, they've got Berlusconi. That's quite astounding if you know who they elected there. And there are different bombastic wannabe autocrats all over that come and go. But you're right. Europeans are people beyond our borders. They admire our ideals, and I think they cut us a little slack when we fall short of that. But as citizens, I think we got to remember that the world needs us, and it's not just altruism. I've sort of calibrated my whole pitch when I'm out on the road doing my travel as a political act lectures and so on. And I don't want to go to Bellingham and talk to a bunch of tree huggers about the importance of us taking care of the poor.
Hey, careful! There's some great Bellingham tree huggers on the phone
No, they don't need my message. They don't need my message. I can learn from them. I like to go to places where they can't believe that we're talking about this kind of thing, inspired by our travels. And when I do that, I just love to kind of think it's more than just idealism. It's also a practical investment. I think Americans, I'm not talking about progressive Western Washington. I'm just talking about when you wonder, how could we elect the president we've got? Well, this country's a lot different than what surrounds me here in Edmonds, And I think the practical, the pragmatic, the investment of it all for our security is a big deal. And I'm really concerned that we don't learn from this COVID-19 crisis. I mean, there might be a silver lining there. And I think it could be that in the future, victories are not going to be win-lose. You can't have the art of the deal to solve your problem. Victories have to be win-win, or it's going to be win-lose. And when you travel, you realize the beauty of that. So I should say, when you travel in a thoughtful way, and if you travel wanting to get out of your comfort zone, if you travel wanting to reconsider truths you were raised thinking were self-evident and God-given. I just love to have my ethnocentrism walloped when I travel. And I just think that's the mark of a great trip.
I won't name the region, but my family consigned me to the back seat on one trip because I was just too uncomfortable. in the passenger front side, and they said, "You're done. You get in the back seat, and be uncomfortable there because you're annoying the hell out of us." And so, so anyway, that's a half of an admission from me, to be fair. So hey, we have a lot of questions from folks, but I have one for you, kind of a fun one. Do you still have time to play the piano? You used to play the piano to finance your trips to Europe. Do you still get to play the piano?
I sure do. In fact, now that it's kind of odd that I'm getting a lot of people interviewing me lately. I was in the New York Times daily podcast. I'll be in Time magazine with a four-page spread in about a month, and GQ.
I know you're only saying that because you're comparing it to how great this one's going, and so
yeah, I'm. It's so odd for the guy who travels all the time just to be stuck at home. People want to. How are you doing that? And this is the first. This is the first 4th of July coming up that I've been home here in Edmonds in 30 years, because I'm always in Europe during this time. And I find that I'm brushing off old passions. I'm playing the piano more. I love playing my piano, and I'm learning new things. In a lot of ways, this lockdown is sort of therapy for somebody who's addicted to productivity. I'm just having to realize there's more to life than increasing its speed. I've got a wonderful partner who's teaching me how to cook. I've made it until this age, and I've never really cooked. I love to talk about these eurekas. I was cutting through an onion the other day, and it occurred to me, until this crisis, I had never felt this beautiful sensation of a knife cutting through an onion, a crispy onion. It was beautiful. I've had a stove in this house. I've lived here for 10 years. I've never turned the stove on until now, and it's getting a lot of work. I just discovered there's a disposal in the island. I've got a disposal up next to the little sink in the island. I didn't know it was there. I've never really made pasta before. I'm sure an expert in pasta when it comes to eating it. So I'm enjoying that. My partner Shelley's got a couple of beautiful dogs. I've got to admit, I had a bad attitude about dogs up until now. I just didn't have time for dogs in my life, and I don't even want to tell you what I thought about people who spent all the time walking their dogs. Now it's a beautiful part of every day. We take a walk with the dogs down to the beach. The sunset for me is a celebration. I'm looking out right now across the Puget Sound at the North Peninsula, and I've always seen these devotional books. You're a good Lutheran, those devotional books, and there's always a sunset on the cover. Every night is a devotional cover out there. And I actually dusted off my trumpet. I had not even wiggled those valves for 30 years. And thank goodness there was some valve oil there. And I play taps now when the sun goes down right here. It's the most enjoyable thing, because it spreads across the little community here, and dogs howl and people clap, and everybody reminds each other that we're in this together. So I think there's some silver linings to this. And I know the power of business and economic metabolism will probably steamroll everything once we open up again. But I hope that there's a silver lining, and I hope people can take this quiet time, this little pause, to remember that, as I said, there's more to life than increasing its speed. And we have a lot to take care of.
Thanks. I want to turn to Todd Grocky, who's moderating the questions. And Todd, do we have any questions from anyone? I'm sure we do. I've been seeing some things come up. What's going on?
Yes, Bob Hallahan is going to ask you a question, and maybe for Rick Steves too. I wasn't exactly sure, but I am going to unmute him right now. And
we can do that, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Can you
Bob,
hear
yes,
go
hello,
ahead.
good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes,
You're
we
good,
can.
Bob.
Good, yeah. So I'm calling from Oak Harbor, and great to see you. Thanks for the time tonight. Two questions. One is about, for each of you really. So I'm in the travel industry myself. I'm an airline pilot based in SeaTac, and very interested. I really appreciate the ability of travel to further people's understanding of each other, and that's one of the reasons I value it. I also concerned about the impact on the climate of aviation. So I see that Europe is started this flight shaming thing. So for Mr. Steves, what else is Europe doing to encourage sustainable air travel? And for Congressman Larson, what can we do at CTAC? What can the federal government do to encourage sustainable air travel throughout the country?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Rick, you want to take the first shot?
Sure, and thanks, Bob. That's a very good question. You and I both make our living off of people flying. I'm not into flight shaming. I'm into mitigation. That's what you call it. Yeah, mitigation.
Yeah.
And is that right? Yeah, you mitigate the carbon you produce. So I take 30,000 people to Europe and back every year. It takes $30 smartly invested in carbon mitigation to produce as much good as one person produces bad when it comes to climate change. So if I lived in a beautiful world, a utopian world, I would want my government to tax me for the carbon that I produce to make money. But that's really not going to float the way we run our accounting in our government right now. So I need to give myself a self-imposed carbon tax. And I just did that last year. It was a new program. It's called our Climate Smart Initiative. And we told all the 30,000 people that went with us to Europe that we're going to pay the $30 that you are causing in climate change carbon emitted by investing in mitigation. And we did 30,000 times $30, that's 900,000. We rounded it up to $1 million. We gave that money in $100,000 grants to 10 different organizations. The conventional way for a business to do that is in carbon offsets and this kind of thing, but I wanted to make a twofer out of it. I wanted to invest in the developing world, helping farmers do their work while contributing less to climate change. So we chose 10 organizations that are in the trenches in the developing world, helping farmers with what's called climate smart agriculture. So this has been an exciting opportunity to work on deforestation and to work on securing the water table and to helping people have seeds that are better for the soil and more drought resistant and so on. And at the same time, helping our travelers go to Europe and back with the peace of mind that they're going carbon neutral. So to me, that's the way you solve it. And I just wish the government took an honest approach to that and told us, if we're not going to tax you for your carbon, at least we want to have a real straightforward, reliable, scientific way that you can measure how you can be honestly carbon neutral. And then you can take that hit on your bottom line just because you're an ethical businessman. And then what we're trying to do, it's on my website, it's a program. And the top of that program says, please steal this and use it without crediting us in your travel business so your customers can fly with a carbon neutral approach. And we want to shame other companies to do honest accounting when it comes to climate change who are in the travel industry.
Yeah, I like your Abby Hoffman approach. Steal this book, steal this idea, right?
Steal this idea. Don't credit me, just use it. Yeah.
So on my score, what CTAC can do, I will say I'm the chair of the aviation subcommittee, and I've taken very seriously the idea of making flying cleaner and greener, but not just aviation, but the actual airport operations as well. So there are some things CTAC is doing right now, electric mules or electric cars to push and pull airplanes out. They're plugging in airplanes into the electricity grid instead of using diesel to get them power while they're sitting and waiting. But also, I've got a bill that has been included in the HEROES Act. And I'm sorry, I'm checking my thing here. So my other phone, just make sure I don't have to go vote. I've also have a bill in the HEROES Act that would use the National Academy of Sciences to finally catalog what airports and airlines are doing, as well as then identifying those gaps in airlines and airports so that we know what to do. We know what's going to be most effective to make flying cleaner and greener. As Bob noted, European aviation industry is getting ahead of us on this score because they see there's an economic benefit. And again, we can't be left behind on that. We have to be thinking competitively to be green instead of thinking that it's going to be a detriment to what we do. So that's a few things I'm doing as well. So Todd, you got someone else?
Yes, I do. We have Daphne Ryan next, and I will allow her to.
Okay, I'm going to let, that's great. If Daphne, you're there?
Yep.
Great. Why don't you ask your question? I got to step aside for a moment and take care of my committee,
okay.
and I'll be right back. But please ask your questions, and Todd will moderate.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So maybe I can go backwards, Rick Steves. It's I have traveled to 48 countries, and I love the idea of being able to have my soul touched and changed when I travel somewhere different. In this past year has been filled with complexities, and my question for you and Rick before he left was, if we sat down for coffee on a global perspective from you to me directly, not in a generalized way, would you sell me on how I can become more effective and kind of an ambassador of the virtues that we have in our country to people that are here in my town, up in Oak Harbor and Anacortes, as well as internationally? How can I start to change who I am so I can be a better ambassador of those virtues when I travel? How can I personally help us get back to the America and the connectedness and that soulfulness that I feel we did have a long time ago?
Well, that's a very good thing to aspire to, Daphne, and that's the big question. If I understand your question properly, how can you come back with your new broader global perspective and be a better citizen both of the United States and of the world?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is we got to believe that we can shape the world by how we consume. You know, Bob was talking about how we can fly in a way that is more green. Well, we can support airlines and travel companies that are carbon neutral in their policies. I would think that would be a motivation. The fact is, a lot of people have these high ideals, but then when push comes to shove, they'll go for the best immediate cost, not considering long-term costs. It's kind of the enlightened consumer that considers sustainability and long-term costs rather than just, you know, how much money is it going to cost me right now? Another thing for me is to celebrate the whole idea that, boy, when you travel, you come home and you realize that you are not a fearful person anymore. You see the world as a place that's filled with love and wonderful people. The world is filled with beautiful people and lots of love. By the nature of our TV news, that doesn't ever make the headlines. But when you travel, it makes you a more positive person and a person that has empathy for the rest of the world. You realize that joy across the sea is just as beautiful as joy right here. You realize that suffering across the sea is just as real as suffering right here. And you realize that as our world gets smaller and smaller, it's more important that we recognize and that we put ourselves in a mindset where we are more enthusiastic about building bridges and less enthusiastic about building walls. I find that, you know, when I was a kid, I got a history degree because I love history. And then I decided I better get a business degree for something practical. And when I look back on it now, I find that my history degree was just as practical as my business degree. The history degree gives us tools, you know, and the humanities and the social sciences gives us tools to be critical thinkers and to be responsible citizens. And that's not the norm. And right now in our society, we are aggressively defunding. I'm glad Congressman Larson's back for this. Rick, we're talking about how we can take our new sensibility from travel and come home and make our world a better place starting right here. And I'm just so concerned about how we're aggressively defunding the humanities and social sciences and history and stuff like that in our schools and education, because we all have to be better producer consumers. The mark of a successful and affluent society is not based on material well-being. It's based on sliding up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and getting into things that are creative and challenging and meaningful. It is so poignant when you go to a country that's learned that. And then it's so discouraging when you come home and you see that here in the United States, from the top down, they're seeing us as us people as human capital. And they're measuring us in what can we consume and what can we produce. We're already incredibly wealthy. and we're already incredibly impoverished when it comes to meaningful things. So those are high ideals, Daphne, but I think, you know, you can take the initiative to learn that stuff, and then you can spend a lot of time ruining meals by talking about that. That's what's got me where I am in my life.
Yeah, right, right.
Do it with a smile, do it respectfully, but call people on stuff that you think needs to be called.
Well, and I think, Rick, you know, I went to Morocco and I was able to do a medical mission as a physical therapist, and that changed my stereotype of the people because they had so much joy and so much kindness. And it really pulled me in like many of my other trips have not. And Congressman Larson and I have worked in healthcare for physical therapy for, I don't know, gosh, maybe 15 years now, I think. And
I think that's probably when I first met you, when you're
your
lobbying.
first term, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I've put together, and I have a question for both of you, actually, I guess.
Well, okay, Daphne, there are other people with other questions too.
Sure. Well, so we're finishing up. It was a two-part question for you and Rick. So how do we take if you were going to sit down with me at coffee and tell me what I can do here to make Washington better and what I can effectively do as a person, not just go on and send legislative letters, but what have you seen through COVID in this year that I can do from your perspective to make Washington better and this country better that would be effective? And Rick answered it from a global perspective. I'm curious about your perspective.
Yeah. Go local, go big, go local. What I found is that a lot of our volunteer corps, the people who volunteer for everything, a lot of those folks are 65 years and over and medically compromised. The volunteers at the food bank, for instance, some of the volunteers in schools, which is why we have to call up the National Guard in our state to help pack boxes to meet the new demand at our food banks, is because the people who would normally fill some of those roles are the same people who really can't get out and are not supposed to get out. And so I think what we're going to see after COVID is, I think we're going to still see one way to put it is we're going to see a lot more opportunities for people to volunteer, because you'll be filling the gap, because some of those folks who were volunteering are probably not all those folks are going to go back to the volunteer community that they were in, because of still concerns about getting ill, even though we might be past the pandemic. So the things you can learn then from doing that, not just about yourself, but again, you're interacting with other people, you see other people's lives, and then you learn about other people's lives. And I get to do that as a member of Congress, not from a volunteer perspective necessarily, but I do visit a lot of these places, whether it's a Boys and Girls Club after school program, feeding hungry kids, or the local food bank, to see how food stamp or the SNAP program meshes with getting food on people's tables, and seeing those folks who have to go to these places, and talking to them as well. It's a very valuable experience. It creates empathy, something that is not being modeled, frankly, out of the White House. And hopefully it's made me a more empathetic person, but I think it can help other people be more empathetic. If you're more empathetic, you're more open, you're more willing to help, you're more willing to listen. And I think, maybe that's something that we can gather from this, from a positive from this. I
appreciate that. Yeah.
If I could just add in, we all got to believe that each of us make a difference. Just this last month, a man in New Jersey who's a Syrian American who is a realtor read my Travel as a Political Act book, and he had some critiques, some critical comments on the way I portrayed Islam. And he sent me a very thoughtful letter, and I read it and I loved it. and I thanked him. And then he sent me his lecture that he wrote, and he gives at his local community college to help Americans better understand what Islam is all about. And it was a 75-minute lecture, and I thought I'd watch a few minutes. I couldn't stop watching it. And then I thought, this is so good, I want to share it on my website. And now I've got George's 75-minute lecture from a Christian Syrian American from New Jersey talking about what Islam is all about from a lifetime of him living in Islamic communities, knowing that a quarter of humanity is Islamic. And he made a huge difference just in his own little way by doing what he really believed in to make this world a better place filled with more understanding. And now I've got his 75-minute lecture on my website right next to all my lectures so that people can learn from George what Islam's all about. I'm so thankful for that. And it's a great example of how a realtor in New Jersey can amplify what he's passionate about, whether it's the food bank or relations between different religions or whatever. We all make a difference.
Well, thanks for that, Rick. I'm going to go watch it. And if you ever open up your volunteer tourism, give me a call.
Okay.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Todd?
Yep. Thank you, Daphne. Appreciate that. And then I have Steve Roy with NARF and AFGE. Steve, are you there? Maybe he's not. Steven? Or can I ask the question myself?
Go ahead, Todd.
So this question is for Rick Steves. COVID-19 has taught us many new public health and safety lessons. Your tours usually have 28 tour members, plus the tour guide and bus driver. Thinking down the road, how will you change your business model to safely travel in tight quarters such as bus, boat, train, ferry, etc.? How will you assure your tour members that you will be safe eating during group dinners and anything in public?
Well, you know, when I think about tourism, which is my thing, you got to pack the house. You got to pack the concert hall. You got to pack the airplane. You got to pack the bus, the hotel, and the restaurant in order to offer a good product at a good price and make a profit. You know, if you can only have half the capacity, you got to either have half the quality or double the price. So I'm really concerned about this. How can you have a great artist come to Edmond at the Center of the Arts here, with has 700 seats in it, and it doesn't even pencil out at 700 seats? How can you have 300 people there and still have a concert? You know, it's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of adjustments being made. As far as our look at tourism, well, buses have 50 seats on them. We already have 28 people maximum. So we're kind of social distancing already just because we like small groups. But for me, Rick Steves travel is the opposite of social distancing. I go to Europe to have my cheeks kissed in France. I go to Ireland to share a Guinness with a bunch of strangers at the bar in a pub. I go to Italy to enjoy the passeggiata and the piazza. Frankly, I can't imagine Rick Steves travel without that closer connection. I fully believe that tourism will come back, but it's going to be incremental. Right now, there's almost nothing. Then there's going to be regional tourism. Right now, for my publisher, my books used to be the big sellers for my publisher. My books are selling nothing now. And what is keeping them alive are the regional road trip books, you see. So it'll be road tripping. It'll be local people traveling local. I'll be going out to the ocean coast instead of to France, you know. Then you're going to have, in Europe, it's going to be the French people going to the French Riviera. It's going to be the Italians enjoying their hill towns. It's going to be the Swiss hiking in the Swiss Alps. Then you're going to have individuals who are bold to go independently internationally. My cousin in Norway just called me, and she's going to Greece from Norway, knowing that she's got a 10-day quarantine when she gets back to Norway. But she's going to do that to go to her favorite Greek island and then come back and have that lockdown for her own country's safety. Then it'll progress and you will have organized tourism, but that's going to be the very last. As far as I'm concerned, all of this stuff that people are doing right now to talk about eating in bubbles and doing hotel rooms every other night, and I don't know what else they're doing, that's an interim. That's not going to be the new norm. The new norm is going to be, I hope, very close to what today is, but it's just going to take a while. Nobody knows the future of this, but I'm hoping that we'll go through an interim period where there is going to be this quasi-tourism, and then we'll get back to a tempered version of what we've been used to. I'm not going to be the first tour organizer out of the gate. It's just too emotional and expensive and disheartening to sell all these tours and then send everybody their money back. We were very careful to give 34,000 people every penny of their money back without any runaround or any of this deception that was frustrating a lot of people in the tourist industry, because we know that the times will be good again, and we want to take care of our travelers because they're going to come back to us knowing that we're ethical in that regard. But that's the challenge, is how are we going to maintain the beauty of travel, which is people to people, in this post-COVID era? We don't know.
Yeah, great, thanks. I see Steve Roy is here. I'll ask. I do have Steve Roy's question, and I'll read it. But Steve Roy had asked about the infrastructure bill. He asked ahead of time because he was noting in Europe they have a great high speed highway system. France has autoroute, Italia has autostrada. Probably hammering the pronunciations of that. Of course, the Autobahn as well. So what's the status of our infrastructure bill, he asked, after all this? Well, we're almost done with it in the House. Committee will be passing that and put it on the floor in July for voting. It's a $500 billion 5-year bill. Makes a major investment in roads, bridges, highways, transit. But importantly, what it does is finally starts to see transportation as an opportunity to be greener and cleaner. So there's a huge investment in low and no emission transit, huge investment in electric vehicle and the infrastructure to support electric vehicles. So people get over the concern about running out of electricity halfway through their trip. So the infrastructure rollout is very important for that. We're going to marry that with a couple of other bills on the floor, including water and sewer infrastructure, which people may not, these are things we take for granted, but there are things that we can do to make our water and wastewater systems much more energy efficient, since we use them all the time. But we can make them more efficient in how we use water, and that's an important part. Just, it's one of those, dealing with climate change is doing a million little things and doing them all the time. It's not one thing. And so this infrastructure bill, we're seeing as an opportunity to start turning a corner to get a greener and cleaner infrastructure package to the White House. If not this White House, then the next one.
Rick, did you know that I think the second biggest market for Teslas is Norway? One of the biggest, hottest selling cars in Norway is a Tesla. A Tesla is actually not very expensive in Norway because it gets so many benefits from the government. They can go down one-way roads, they can park anywhere, they don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah,
it's amazing how these European countries can shape consumption by heavy-handed top-down government policies.
So think about that, because we have 320 million people in the United States, and I assume we're the number one Tesla market in the world. Norway is number 2, and they have 4.5 million people.
Right.
Okay, so
that's quite a statement right there when you think
there's a lot of upside in the United States for electric vehicles.
Oh man, that's you get inspired when you go to Europe and you see what they can do with. In the United States, it's kind of like big bad government or little good government, and in Europe there's a third option, big good government, and they have high expectations for their taxes. But they know there's a certain efficiency in everybody working together through a government, through a society that believes in governance. And as much as bad governance breaks my heart, good governance turns me on.
Yeah, and they do believe in governance in Norway and Sweden. I'm married to a Swedish American, and good governance in Sweden too. So
not quite as good, but pretty good, according to my Norwegian relatives.
Tia, if you're there, I didn't say it. Rick Steve said it. Todd, is there another question?
Absolutely. So we'll have a couple more here, and I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to try to have Mary Nichols, if you're there. And if you're not, then I will ask the question. Mary, can you hear us? Okay, well, I'll just ask the question. It's really brief. Is there any discussion in Congress regarding mandatory masks on flights, Congressman?
There hasn't been. There's been a lot of discussion about the safety within the cabin, health and safety within the cabin. We in Congress haven't, Democrats and Republicans as a body, we really haven't moved forward to make a lot of this stuff mandatory, but we've been clear about what we believe ought to happen. And that is resulting in the airlines actually making changes. In fact, you saw American Airlines today kick someone off an airplane for refusing to wear a mask. As it turns out, it was a political activist who was doing this as a stunt, but he has now been banned from American Airlines for life as a result of this. And so airlines are, to their credit, are stepping up to this. I fly still to DC. We're still meeting in session, and I wear a mask, and most everyone's wearing a mask. No one's seeing this as a big political statement. I think there's probably a few people who don't, but I can't really recall anyone on an airplane not wearing it during the flight now. I mean, in March, maybe that was the case, but not now because people are kind of getting used to it. So the need to move towards a mandatory step probably isn't necessary right now. But there are going to be some folks who pull this stunt like this guy did. And, I think American Airlines is going to be rewarded for banning this guy for life, and other airlines will probably come close to doing the same kind of policy. So,
Rick, I've got this kind of fear that as a tour organizer, and I need to have Americans being able to go to Europe. Europe will open up, and there'll be all sorts of travel freely around Europe. And the little
Rick, keep talking because I got to step aside.
Okay, the bottleneck is going to be that sadly, European countries may not allow Americans to into their countries. So Europe is free; everybody's traveling around, and I'm ready to get back in business. But because of our country's inability to work together in a smart and concentrated way, in a consistent way, our country may not be allowed in some of these countries for whom the coronavirus is something behind them rather than in the middle of them. So, Todd, if you want to ask any questions or whatever.
Yeah, we got one final question, and we'll wait for the congressman, and then we'll just kind of wrap this up with any final thoughts. But this is a really pressing issue lately with the protests, and we want to hear what the congressman's remarks are too with the communities of color that is disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. But just want to hear your thoughts if you have any views on the recent protests lately and what's the unrest that's going on around the country. And for the most part, these peaceful protests have been really making a huge impact on our country. And just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm sort of your typical, nice white American that hasn't really been aware of this. And I think silence is violence in a lot of ways, and it's responsible now to be awakened about this systemic racism in our country. It's systemic racism, I think, in many different ways. I didn't really understand the culture in the way we police people was so blatantly racist. Now I understand that. I never heard of a holiday called Juneteenth until this year. Why don't we have a national holiday that celebrates the end of slavery? When you think about it, it's like, well, of course we should do that. And then you learn ever since 1865, certain people in our society have celebrated this, but it's sure not much of a holiday in Seattle. And I think it should be. We can march, and marching's been very productive, but I think the next question is, how do we actually make progress beyond that? And, I think there's a lot of things we can do, but people need to find things they can do. I'll tell you two things that I'm tuned into lately. Access to the polls. I think there's a racist desire to tamp down the amount of people that can go who can vote. And I'm helping fund an organization called Lawyers and Callers. It's spearheaded by Sojourners Magazine. And Lawyers and Callers is raising money to help Black pastors in states that have a real problem with this stand up for the civil liberty for people of color to have access to voting. And lawyers and collars, it means lawyers and people with collars. So it's pairing lawyers with black pastors and giving them the financial wherewithal to speak up and defend the right to vote for people of color in these troubled states. And you can imagine which some of those states are. So that's something very exciting. And if you want to learn about that, you can check out Lawyers and Collars. Sojourners Magazine is a progressive Christian magazine that really stands up for civil liberties in our country. Another thing is the drug war. To me, a lot of you know that I was outspoken and a leader in legalizing marijuana. And Washington, along with Colorado in 2012, the first states to legalize marijuana. And it wasn't spearheaded by a bunch of potheads. It was spearheaded by people who care about good policy, about who don't want racism in our drug policy, who want to get rid of a black market that's empowering and enriching gangs and organized crime. But the drug war is flat out racist, and it's just a convenient way for people that don't want black people to have the opportunity to vote to be disenfranchised. Florida just voted to re-enfranchise, to give the vote back to ex-felons who have done their time. This is hundreds of thousands of black men in Florida who spent time in prison. They're ex-felons, they've done their time, they're back in society, but then people, let's just say regressive forces in Florida decided to go against the will of the people. 70% of Florida voted to give black ex-felons or ex-felons back their vote. But the people in power right now have found a technicality to stop black people from actually being able to vote, even though it's been given back to them. This is just racism. This is systemic racism, and we need to call it, we need to fight it, and we can do that. So, the drug war is the new Jim Crow. There are ways to fight that. I think economic justice is related to racism in so many ways, and we just need progressive government. We need people to believe in government, and we need to rectify this. So yeah, let's take it one step farther. Black lives matter, and what are we going to do about it? There are things we can do about it.
Great, thank you, Rick. And then we'll just let the congressman.
I had to stretch there, Rick.
Let me unmute you. Can you
Are
hear?
there? Okay.
There. This will be our final question, and then we'll have some final thoughts, Congressman. But,
Well, you have to make it quicker than that.
sorry about that. This is Rick just asked the question, and Rosa Maria Graziani asked about what is Congress going to do to help communities of color disproportionately impacted by COVID-19? The pressing issues are financial hardship, increased homelessness, rent debt, food shortage. What is Congress going to do for communities?
Well, I think what we've learned from the pandemic is that there's been a disproportionate impact, both in terms of the healthcare side and on the economic part, a disproportionate impact on people of color. We do need to expand testing. We need to focus the healthcare response on certain communities as well, including communities of color. We aren't really doing that much right now. We were able to get our own State Department of Health. My office worked with others in the congressional delegation to get the demographic data more particular, so that we had a clearer picture of the impact of COVID-19 on people of color in Washington State. With regards to the economic support, we changed the rules around the payment protection program in order to give support to community lending institutions that do more work with businesses that are owned by people of color as well. And it actually worked. We actually made changes to that program, and it did actually work to get more access to credit to small businesses that are owned by people of color. There are. Hold on a second. I'm also listening to something I got to pay attention to here. So. I'll be right back. Hold on a second.
Okay, well, this will be time. We're going to wrap this up, folks. But just wanted to let people know our website is www.ricklarson.org. We're really asking folks to get involved with the election coming up. So if you're interested in volunteering or helping the campaign or donating, please go to the website and sign up. Our social media handles are at Facebook at Rick Larson WA02, and our Twitter handle is at Larson Rick. Rick, Steve, is there any final thoughts that you want to have? Any comments? We're kind of wrapping this up, and then.
It's just great to be together with people and sort of inspire each other to get involved and make a difference. If people are curious what I've been up to, my Facebook page is just at Rick Steves, and it lists a lot of these things I've been mentioning in the last half an hour. But it's just really important we have a Congress that understands our concerns and our values, and we've got that in Congressman Larson, that's for sure, and that's something I'm really thankful for.
Wonderful. Well, I have a question for you, Rick. When it is safe to travel to Europe, where's an area that you have not gone? And I'm imagining there might be a couple of either cities or towns that you're interested in going.
Larson, most high.
Is there any place that you think you will go that you haven't been before?
You know, Todd, my work is going back to places I've been before and updating my material. That's the funny thing. And I've got a TV crew, and we're just all excited about making new TV shows. So when I can go back to Europe again, the first thing I want to do is I've got scripts and great ideas to make a couple of TV shows in Poland. And I want to go to Iceland and make a couple of TV shows there. I've had a lot of fun traveling in Iceland lately. But the first thing I'm going to do when I go back to Europe, I just canceled. In fact, I think today, the 16th, no, a couple of days ago, I was supposed to meet my family on our Best of Europe tour. It's the Best of Europe in 3 weeks. It's our flagship tour. My daughter's getting married. I wanted to get to know her fiance's family. They're all from the Midwest. They've never been to Europe. So all of them were going to go on this tour. My son was going to be the guide, and I was going to have the bus just for our extended family to get to know my daughter's in-laws. And it was going to be the first time I've been on a Rick Steves tour where I was totally on vacation, just having fun with my kids and her fiance's family. And we canceled it, but we didn't end it. We just delayed it. So when we get through this crisis, that's the first thing I'm going to do is resurrect that dream and go to Europe with my family and let my son be the tour guide. And we're going to do this tour that I've been doing ever since I was a kid. Europe's 3,000 miles in 3 weeks, the very best loop from Amsterdam down to Rome and back to Paris.
Great, thank you.
So I'm back, and I apologize, Rosa Maria. I'm going to have Todd get your information, and we'll get you a much more complete response back. We scheduled this event probably a week and a half ago or so, and then and it's been great. But just at the time we started, the meat of the other work that I'm doing got started too, and we just can't plan around those things. So I just apologize for that. I hope all the other answers were adequate for folks as well. And I think we'll probably have to wrap up right now.
Yep.
But Steve, Rick, do you have any concluding thoughts?
I just want to thank you. I'm so thankful that I'm a big fan of our congresspeople and our senators, and I'm hopeful for this election season, but we have to have all hands on deck to take back our government and let America be the America that we all want to be proud of. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and thanks for being on, and thank you everyone for helping out with the campaign. I want to thank the elected officials that were willing to come on and take some of their time to hear this as well. Cassie Franklin, the mayor of Everett, I know, a city council member from Bellingham, Pinky Vargas, and prosecuting attorney up in Skagit, Rich Wyrick was on, probably many others, and all of you as well. I want to emphasize something Rick said, that, and this is a fundamental rule of politics. You can't rely on the other person to help you win. You have to help you win. As bad as we all might think the president is, and I'm on that list of people who think he's really bad for a lot of reasons, we can't rely on the polls. We can't rely on him saying the next dumb thing. We have to rely on ourselves to get people out to vote. We have to rely on ourselves to help others get out to vote. We have to rely on ourselves to volunteer on campaigns to make those victories happen. It's so critical, because if we want to go to the soft power, if we want to expand, continue to be that ideal that some people around the world still waiting for us to re-become. We need to win this fall and change the direction of this country. And thank you for all joining. And I want to thank Rick Steves again for playing the piano a long time ago to pay for his trips to go to Europe, and then turning that into a business that brings people together. There are very few companies like that in the world, and very few people with the vision that Rick Steves has to make that happen. So I want to thank you again, Rick, for doing this. Thanks a lot.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.